And I'm an assistant professor at Michigan State University, and I work with the North Central Regional Center for Rural Development. So I'm hosting today's webinar. The title is Evaluating Impacts of Natural Resource Development. So I want to say thank you to everyone for participating. And before I introduce the speakers, I want to point out just a few items. So the first is there's a banner at the bottom that says NCRCRD webinar notes. And there's a phone number and a website on the chance that you have some technical difficulties during the course of the webinar. So we'll leave that information up. The next is there's a chat box to the lower left, and it says chat everyone on it. So we're going to utilize that to facilitate the Q&A. So the questions and answers. So as your questions come up during the course of the presentation, feel free to put them in the box and just hit enter after you've typed your information in, and we'll get to those questions at the conclusion of the slides presentation. Also at the conclusion of the presentation, we're going to have a quick survey for you, the participants, to fill out. It should just take a moment. And last, the webinar is being recorded, and so it'll be archived on the NCRCRD page, and that information to the archive link is also in the webinar notes. Okay, so with that, I want to go ahead and introduce our presenters. So first is Meredith Redlin. She's a professor in the Department of Sociology and Rural Studies at South Dakota State University. She teaches, researches, and publishes in the areas of community development and rural diversity. Also with us is Jeffrey Jacquet, and he is an assistant professor also in the Department of Sociology and Rural Studies at South Dakota University, and he's published widely in the areas of energy and environment. And so with that, I think, Jeffrey, I will hand the microphone off to you.
Okay, thanks very much for the introduction. Hopefully everyone can hear me okay. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about a workshop that we held over 2 days in I guess it was January of this year, using some grant award money that was provided by NCRCRD, and we'll talk a little bit more about the rationale behind the workshop and the reasons for meeting and some of the outcomes of that meeting. And so just to explain the picture a little bit. So this is about half of the meeting group in the middle of a tour of the local ethanol plant outside of Brookings, South Dakota here, the Valero plant, and we had a pretty excellent tour, sort of capped off the 2-day workshop. And so that's our smiling faces in the coveralls and safety glasses and so on. And so the rationale behind the 2-day workshop, and really the grant in and of itself, was to think about ways that we could connect and sort of coordinate social science research on the impacts of natural resource development across a number of different categories. And really there's a couple of challenges that we had identified, mainly geographic constraints, disciplinary constraints, and sort of different types of energy development out there, and that these different maybe attributes are constraining the research, social science research and sort of the products of that research. Just a little bit of background information, looking at the locations, geographic locations of oil and gas development in the U.S. or even North America. This map just kind of shows these different regions, and a lot of the research that's been done has been sort of, well, here's research on the Marcellus Shale in Pennsylvania and New York. Here's research on the Bakken in North Dakota. Here's research in the Barnett Shale, and not a lot of sort of meta-analysis, if you will, of the different social economic impacts to communities, to landscapes nationally, or similarities or differences between these different regions. And the same thing for wind resources. We've seen some wind research, not a whole lot, some in Pennsylvania, some in Iowa, for example, Indiana, but not a lot of research that's compared wind and natural gas, or compared these different locations of energy. This map shows potential biomass. Here in Brookings, we're sort of ground zero for a lot of ethanol production, and that also has a geographic component as well. And also, there's a lot of people who sort of specialize in ethanol, sociologists, social scientists, but not necessarily dabble or in other types of energy development. And so the idea behind this workshop was to try to unite some of these different disciplines. The different energy regimes, there are some significant differences in terms of the size of the workforce, the skill level of the workforce, where these workforces are coming from, the sort of the industries involved, the supply chains. There's different policy implications and applications. Some are controlled by local, regulatory policies, and some energy developments are exempted from local regulatory abilities. There's sort of health, psychological and physical health implications for these different energy regimes. There's different economic factors involved, whether it's royalties or jobs or economic stimulus and so on. And there's lots of different sort of implications for housing, for land use, for environmental impacts amongst the different energy types. But on the same time, there's a lot of similarities, and so there's a lot of opportunity to sort of compare and contrast, to build research that looks at these different types of energy developments from a larger, perspective, and sort of exploring these similarities. All of them sort of involve industrialization of rural landscapes. There's support and opposition to all of them. I think all of them have been sort of subsumed under this economics versus the environment narrative. And so the idea behind the workshop was to sort of explore opportunities to compare and contrast, integrate research across the geographies, the energy regimes, and then also the social science disciplines. And furthermore, there's lots of increasing number of instances where a lot of this energy is happening in the same, different types of energy is happening in the same place. This is a picture I took in northern Pennsylvania, but there's lots of other instances where you see wind turbines and pump jacks, wind turbines and ethanol plants, and so on and so forth. And so there's a lot of need for sort of a cumulative effects research in a lot of these types of energy development. And I believe, so here I'm going to kick it over to Meredith, who's going to talk more about our work at the workshop.
Thanks, Jeffrey. Yes, that was the context, the research context in which we proposed this workshop. The workshop itself was 2 days in January in South Dakota, so we want to salute our brave participants. But we had a broader goal in bringing together people, and we also engaged them in a lot of activities, a lot of sitting around and meeting, as you can see here. Grant planning, tour of an ethanol plant, local foods dinners, etc., to help us pass the time. The primary goals for this grant work and the bringing scholars together was first, of course, to create a working interdisciplinary network of people who'd done research on energy. We also were looking to develop and submit additional new grants at the national level on energy impacts, certainly because we had participants from around the United States and Canada. We wanted to share knowledge on industry efforts. That's one area of our research which often is underplayed or underserved in multiple ways. But to share knowledge on how industry is attempting to work on and with the communities on the various impacts or alleviation of certain of the impacts that Jeffrey already noted. And last, we are still working on and feel we have a base to build a lasting network for this kind of energy research through the development not only of further funding but also of individual and cooperative projects. For our participants, we did have 22 faculty members from 18 universities. We had representatives from the eastern region, western and midwestern regions of the United States, as well as 2 provinces in Canada. The variety of participants also represented a series of different disciplines: sociology, geography, economics, public health, political science, communication studies, public policies, community development as a discipline unto itself, as well as specialty skills in demography and psychology. The diversity of these areas is particularly relevant to the challenges that are posed by various kinds of not only overlapping energy regimes, but the whole intersection of energy and community as a phenomenon. So the kinds of perspectives then that were brought together by bringing together these series of researchers, we were able to discuss and explore both contexts and resources for psychosocial risk factors within the context of energy development, including particular health issues, and as Jeffrey mentioned, both physical but also some stress and mental health issues that arise from various forms of rapid development. Issues of social justice were discussed, particularly in relation to diverse communities and energy development. And also the role of the sense of place. From those larger maps presented, you could see that the sense of place and how the energy regime itself becomes a sense of place in practice. It is something that came up, whether it is North Dakota anymore or whether it's just the Bakken. Also, the fact of these overlapping energy regimes and looking within those, again, flashing back on those maps, certainly in this particular area of the country, in the Dakotas, we do have a lot of overlap of multiple energy regimes in various forms of development. We are primary for wind, although it's earlier in development. There's certainly oil and shale development, and there's also, of course, a long-standing dedication to biomass, ethanol, etc. And also what we were looking at is how people had already been looking at clear definitions for community planning in and around at least individual regimes. We didn't have a lot of information on community planning with differing regimes, which was then one of the things we hoped to look at. The challenges, well, aside from the spanking jumpsuits and safety glasses that we challenged our participants with some of the intellectual challenges we faced were coming up with common metrics for the comparative work, and this was both across disciplines but also across the energy regimes, that there were very different metrics for the kinds of impacts on the community, different timelines, as not all of the energy development was in a boom form or would have the same manifestations in the communities or would require the same impacts from labor forces. Another interdisciplinary challenge was the creation of strong interdisciplinary university and industry partnerships. One of our participants, Dr. Jean Theodori, had probably, in working with many other colleagues, the most experience in partnering with industry within the shale industry. But there's less direct connection with various other forms, either ethanol or wind. And another challenge we faced as a group of researchers trying to plan is that we have very different investigative procedures as far as not only developing projects but putting the procedures in place. to the challenges on funding that could bring together this kind of interdisciplinary diversity was something else that came up within our discussions. As a way to start our discussions, one of the key things we did was we shared a series of resources. Now, these will be posted for you in another area, I believe in the chat area, and also will be available through the NCRCRD recording. But these were some of the key resources that we shared. The first web link there is really an excellent example of an industry and university partnership that contains us not only wonderful research information, but also a lot of modeling for how this kind of partnership can go forward. The second one is a private foundation example of a tool that could be shared and used on determining fiscal impacts. The third is actually an industry website talking about various ways in which royalties for energy development are calculated and within the different regimes. And our final website listed here is one that's specific to North Dakota, and it's specific about the Bakken, and it's a kind of a summary of an interdisciplinary community impacts project. I'm going to turn it over to Jeffrey here to link back with our research to talk about solutions.
Okay, thanks, Meredith. So these are just some of the broader themes of solutions, or ways to address a lot of these coordination challenges. We sort of talked about that there needs to be this forum or network or sort of shared space for the integration and coordination of research, which is really the basis behind this grant application that we have in the works, that I think Meredith will talk about a little bit later down the road of this webinar, but which includes maybe something, a targeted symposium on the social impacts of energy development. I think we agreed that there's a lot of different conferences and workshops out there in which research on energy development plays a small part. However, not really a place for social scientists who are studying energy to come together as a group. And then also we identified I should say, as far as that forum, we were talking about maybe conference calls, a website to share resources and these sorts of things, and a lot of that would take, I think, to be successful, we identified the need for sort of administrative support, for lack of a better word, which really just means funding to help for someone to play the organizational role behind setting up a lot of this up, and a couple other solutions, to identify some sort of common indicators and data collection standards. And so when you're collecting data in Pennsylvania, to know that here are some of the major sort of data collection standards and or types of data that we could collect that would be most useful when looking at, say, impacts in North Dakota, and sort of ways that we could make it easier to compare and contrast different types of research across the U.S., but also look at cumulative effects. And this might be survey questionnaire types or scales that are used, or even survey methodologies, or on the qualitative side, sort of interview protocols, and just to have not necessarily rules as to what kind of surveys are acceptable, but more just a conversation about what types of methods people are using in order to to try to keep an eye on this comparative and sort of collaborative goals. And then again, the shared library of research tools and educational resources, and that might be a website or a shared web space that posts, surveys that have been used, the posts reports that have been done, and so on. Sort of, I think there's quite a few websites out there that have sort of collections of reports and collections of documents, but this would be maybe a slightly more academic in that it might be, a collection of survey instruments or something along those lines. And then also we talked a lot about sort of education and outreach and the need to educate people on sort of how to use social science and social science reports, the usefulness of social science data, both on, on the policy and the regulatory side. On the industry side, there's a lot of talk about needing to educate industry on what it is that social scientists do and the importance of that research. Dr. Jean Theodori has been successful in basically getting industry to pay him for him to tell them how to use social science, and that seems like a great position to be in, and needs to be replicated beyond just the areas of success that he's had, especially into other industries beyond just oil and gas. And then, as we talked about, procuring the resources to administrate and sustain this forum was one of the larger solutions. And so we have a number of ideas that came out of there that a lot of them sort of require, it comes down to money basically to make sure that this type of work can be completed. And I think I'm going to turn it over to Meredith here to talk about some of the products that did come out of the workshop to this end.
Yes, thanks, Jeffrey. The products that we get in it, it is about getting that money, but also the thing that's interesting, that was very interesting about bringing this group together was that most of us, some had met one another, but not all had met each other. And so it was a real unique opportunity to talk to people whose work was in the same area and think about where can we go from here, how do we build on this. The products that came out thus far in our project, and as a result of the generous funding of the NCRCRD, are particularly the development of grants. And it was in this quest for additional funding that we are continue to be connected and working. From the one particular workshop we had, we did have 2 effort grants that were developed, one of which was funded in this last round. That came about because of the context, again, of the interdisciplinary nature of the research pertaining to energy regimes and the impacts on communities. The project Jeffrey was referring to is one that we're looking at, and this is the development of a research coordination network through the NSF. The aspirations we have for solutions that we've presented, or at least a form of clearinghouse and a more formalized, long-standing network between researchers, those who participated in our workshop, but also at a larger level. We were hoping that this particular funding can help us formalize a very systematic form of energy development research and the people who are engaged in that work. So in conclusion, thanks very much to NCRCRD for funding this meeting and the shared grant and research initiatives that have come out of it. The Small Grants Fund provided by NCRCRD really does provide such an important impetus for the collaborative work for all of us in and outside of the region, and it's very, very much appreciated. And I know that Jeffrey initiated, but I will echo him that we do want to thank all of these people from many, many places, some warmer than South Dakota, for coming to South Dakota in the brave month of January. And then I guess,
I would.
John, we turn it over to you, or Jeffrey, last words from you?
I just had a yeah. I was thinking one comment on the NSF, the Research Coordination Network. The number of different solutions that we had, we recently, not recently, but sort of suddenly came to the conclusion that a lot of them weren't appropriate for an NSF Research Coordination Network. We're interested in outreach, in extension, in providing, these sort of manuals on how to interpret social science data and so on and so forth. And we had asked the NSF program directors about that, and they were sort of, I think they made the comment that NSF reviewers weren't used to seeing outreach and extension, which means you're probably not going to get that funded. And so we really had to scale back our ambitions for that grant. And so there's a lot of other things we would like to do, but it's sort of the finding a home for a lot of these different ambitions is difficult. So I guess that was the last comment I had. And also, these couple pictures that was the ethanol plant that we toured outside of Aurora, but the other photos were photos I believe Meredith took in the Bakken Shale in Montana and maybe North Dakota.
Okay, well, thank you so much for that. I'm going to pop up a survey real quick for the participants to go ahead and if you'll just answer these questions or answer the question really quickly. I'm going to start the question and answer. So it looks like we've already got a couple of questions in. So I'll read the first question, and then it looks like Meredith, the first one's directed to you, and then I'll mute my mic and I'll let you answer. So Steve asks, Meredith, you mentioned 3 common metrics were uncovered. Can you expand on what those metrics actually were?
Steve, I'm going to also call Jeffrey in on this one. When I was speaking of the common metrics, it was more I was looking at what recurred as a area of study across the different energy regimes, and I believe that's what you're referring to. All of these different energy regimes had issues around labor forces. So basically, it would look at what kind of labor force needed to be included within the field of community development or attended to. The other elements, health elements that were coming from each of these differing regimes were a common area that there were shared metrics across, regardless of what the energy regime that was being studied. And the third was really looking at a shared instrument that Jeffrey talked more about, and I'm feeling like you'll get better information there. Jeffrey, do you have something to add here?
I'm trying to recall off the top of my head. I know that there was a number of different issues. The workforce was a big one. The sort of the sort of the level of regulatory sort of authority that local governments had was another sort of a common issue that kept coming up. And I think another thing too is there's this emphasis pretty much across the regions, across the energy types on a longitudinal analysis to be able to survey and come back and survey again to capture the sort of the variability in both the different types or the different stages of energy development, but also after the energy development goes away. So there was I know there's a lot of discussion on sort of building in a longitudinal component to the research that is performed.
Steve, if there's clarification, if we're nowhere near what you wanted us to address, if you could follow up with a little clarification, we'd be happy to respond additionally.
Okay, thank you for that. So the next question is from Julia. Looks like she asks, so I guess this is a broad question, but what sort of effects has the North Dakota energy boom had on South Dakota, for example, with community planning, workforce training, energy policy, et cetera? That's kind of a broad question, but what kind of experience can you share about that related to this, your presentation?
Well, again, I'll start out, Jeffrey, I guess, with this one. Um, it's actually had a series of impacts, and again, we can look at all those areas. Um, South Dakota, the legislature, the economic development groups, county commissioners, et cetera. There's been a huge change in policy. Um, Certainly encouraging at the state level the development of pipelines, but also the establishment of new manufacturing areas, particularly in western South Dakota, which has, I believe it's Highway 85 or 81 that goes directly north into the Bakken. Um, and so there's been a lot of development, more of support manufacturing, even around just north of the Black Hills. Along the North Dakota-South Dakota northern border, there has been a housing developments, housing support. The elements of planning, particularly the community of Lemon, has probably begun um, more work with trying to do a planned increase in both housing and zoning as kind of an overlap from the Bakken development in North Dakota, and has had a little more breathing room to do that rather than many of the communities in North Dakota had. Um, Workforce training, there's certainly been some action in the vocational schools here. There's actually, in many ways, an uptick here in South Dakota uh, higher ed system, particularly in engineering. Not so much in geological development, although our School of Mines, again in West River, uh, is is more poised for that than our institution. I will say that South Dakota is looking at that's happening in North Dakota with great anticipation, and I think that their goal is to uh, their goal is to become uh, uh, the site of all of these problems. Jeffrey, did you have anything to add there?
I, I was going to add two things. One is that one of the nearest sort of major metropolitan areas, the western North Dakota is a pretty rural, isolated area of the U.S. And one of the closest metropolitan areas is the Rapid City area in the Black Hills of South Dakota, which also has a lot of amenity-led development in the Black Hills, as you might imagine. And so there's a lot of anecdotal evidence that a lot of these folks who are working in North Dakota are moving the sort of permanent home base to the Black Hills, and building houses and buying houses in the Black Hills, and then commuting it's only 8-hour drive to North Dakota as opposed to Texas or Louisiana or wherever it was that they were living before. And so there's a lot of anecdotal evidence, although no real evidence. And then the other thing I'd mention, which is more of a regional phenomenon, but also here in South Dakota, is the mining for frac sand, which is the sand they use in the hydraulic fracturing process. And there's only a few places. It's a very particular type of sand, and there's only a few places where it's available. So in Minnesota and Wisconsin, there have been a lot of these sand mines that have opened, and are quite controversial. And then there's proposals to build one or two in the Black Hills region as well. And there are other parts of the country where the frac sand is located. However, it seems that they're sort of starting in this region and moving their way out. So it's a couple of other sort of ancillary impacts from being sort of on the periphery of the boom.
Okay, thank you for that. It looks like Steve says thanks, then you clarified his question. It looks like the next is a comment from Debbie. Wishes best wishes on securing funding. And in Alabama, it looks like they're currently dealing with the wind farm questions and have dealt with concerns about fracking on national forest lands. And it looks like they need a good quality impact study information as they address the environmental and economic kinds of concerns. Any comments on or on her comments, Meredith or Jeffrey?
Well, just on the interplay between the wind farms and the natural gas, oil and gas development. I mean, there's a lot of sort of overlap and cumulative effects when it comes to the leasing processes and to the landowners, whether they're private landowners or state or federal landowners. Wind wind they have a leasing sort of regime, but then they also have the royalties on the production, just like oil and gas does, and you can strip away the air rights from the land, just like you can strip away the mineral rights from the land for oil and gas. And so I'd say that in terms of the sort of the cumulative effects of these types of different energy, there really isn't very much research at all, and so it's definitely a ripe area for some quality impact statements.
I just
Okay,
I concur
go ahead.
with Jeffrey there.
Sorry about that. I didn't mean to cut you off. Thank you for those comments. So Larry asks, so he says, Oklahoma is nearing completion of an interdisciplinary study collecting last decade of data to compare several factors to oil and gas production, including county road expenditures, jobs, earthquakes, that's a big one, injection wells, housing, growth, water use, unemployment, drilling mud disposal, etc. Challenges including getting a water quality metric and how to interpret jobs and population data, since some transient workers don't show up in the data. So I'm going to build on his question. I want to talk about ask about Oklahoma in just a moment. But Jeffrey or Meredith, any comments on this?
Well, I would say that the job data is always a huge conundrum when it comes to these big, especially oil and gas, but really any of these energy sites where you, in the development phase, where you have these big transient workforces. The best that I've been able to do, which is not necessarily all that great, is to just estimate what you believe those workforces to be, and then sort of see what the official worker counts that do show up in the data, and then add in sort of what you estimate to be the uncounted workers. We've it's part of a project in Pennsylvania where we basically counted the number of workers on a per well basis, and then we're able to sort of extrapolate on a per well basis, and it's a methodology that has huge limitations, but it's sort of the best we could do. And there's definitely that's always a huge problem, especially in a lot of these energy developments are occurring in sort of rural and isolated places where the transient workforce has a huge impact, but it's really hard to quantify. Even counting beds is another strategy. Just looking at counting every single place to sleep that there is within commuting distance, and sort of using that as the basis of the workforce population. I'd be definitely interested in hearing more about that study, though, for sure.
Yeah, I agree with Jeffrey. That sounds like a great study, Larry. The only other thing, as a qualitative researcher, I would add to what Jeffrey noted is that there are many times, and it's not perfect for capturing all of the full labor dynamics, but some of the community impacts that from rising and falling of population data can show up particularly in kindergarten enrollments. I know that in several areas of the Bakken that those enrollments will, the degree or the rate of addition and dropping really reflects two different kinds of stages of development and employment of their parents. So particularly at that younger age, there's some utility there in understanding population data. Not for the fully the man camp data, but a lot of the workers are housed in those trailers as you saw, and certainly there's often full families in there.
Okay, thank you for that. So before we wrap up, I've got one other question. I just wonder if you might clarify, either Meredith or Jeffrey. So you talked about the university industry relationships, partnerships, and so I'm originally from Oklahoma, and I was thinking about some of the issues I've seen with, say, the earthquakes and some of the pushback from industry, and in the community a little bit. And now they're starting to ask that questions, but in the context of maybe some of the environmental questions or concerns, how might those industry or university industry relationships kind of shape based on what we've actually seen, say, occur in Oklahoma or Pennsylvania?
Well, I would say that we definitely spent a lot of time talking about that at the workshop, because I think it's an area, the industry-university relationship can be fraught with peril, I think, in terms of whether that you don't want that relationship to be too cozy. And thinking as an alumni of the University of Wyoming, for example. However, it's we also saw it though as this huge area of opportunity, that it seems like the vast majority of social scientists working in this area have very little contact with the industry, and vice versa, and that not only can we learn from them, but they can learn from us. And so I think there was sort of a we're trying to think of a way where we can sort of keep the a healthy degree of distance between the two, but sort of still I guess learn from each other in a way. And the way that one way that we had talked about was really this idea of sort of providing like classes for basically social science 101 classes for industry, workers and officials, administrators to enroll in, to sort of to learn more about the social science research, but that not necessarily so it's more of a formalized relationship in that way. I don't know if Meredith, if you want to add anything.
No, I'm basically I would say the same thing. I think that we found within our workshop is that we were kind of, as researchers too, like kind of all over the map on this idea of should we work with them, should we not, but I think basically I personally, and I would encourage everybody to look at the web link for the first web link there as an example of how there can be productive industry and university partnerships. And in some ways, it is a process of, as Jeffrey noted, making sure that industry understands what we as social scientists do and what we have to contribute. That the relationship isn't one of opposition, but it's one of expanding their knowledge as well.
Okay, thank you for that. So it looks like we've got, okay, one more comment. So from Steve, if we're interested in participating or working with the group, or just keeping up to date with this research, how do we actually go about doing that? So how can we follow you, and what your progress is going to be?
Well, what we were since we're developing the RCN, we're definitely looking for people that would be interested in partnering with that, Steve. In the meantime, what I'm going to recommend is send me your email, and we'd be happy to add you to the group list of the participants from the workshop. And then we've had additional people join. Another researcher from Quebec is also now part of our regular communications. So that's the best way to do it at this point. But we will thank you very much for asking.
Yeah, I would add that it's sort of the trials and tribulations of this process is that, you know, hardly any of us as faculty members are really in a position to sort of to administrate and to moderate this group of researchers, and so hopefully we can find a way to formalize you know, that relationship and to add in the administrative duties. But I think in the meantime it's sort of informal, and it's still happy to continue to build that network.
Okay, well, it looks like we maybe have one other person typing. So Larry's got some information. Larry Sanders, Oklahoma State. I'm an Oklahoma State alumni. He's got some information about the report. It looks like it'll come out around 2015. So we'll keep our eyes on that. And I think that's it with the questions. So it looks like these are thank yous. So I want to take real quick, I want to say thank you again to Meredith and Jeffrey for their presentation today. And also thank you for participating. Meredith or Jeffrey, do you have any kind of parting thoughts as we're wrapping this up?
No, I want to thank Larry for the information and Steve for the questions, well, and everyone for participation, and we look forward to whatever others have to contribute, and I certainly look forward to investigating your research more.
Yep, same here.
Okay, well, thanks to you.
I'm going to put my email in the chat box, and our email on the comment page here, but chat box will have to do, and be more than happy to continue the conversation with anyone. Thanks very much.
Thank you again to you both, and as a reminder, we'll have the this webinar, the archived webinar will be on the NCRCRD page. You can see the website right on this, and we'll leave this up for just a little bit so you've got some time to copy that down and also to get the emails. And with that, we'll go ahead and conclude this webinar. Once again, thanks both to our presenters and to the audience for participating.